Welcome to the show, everyone. Welcome to the show MCJ Report number 44. That's right, I hope everyone is doing really well. It's Monday today. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And welcome to the show. I see Daniel, Lisa, Sally, Anne, Anthony. How you doing? Michael. Things are going really good from this end. Thank you very much for asking. It was a pretty busy weekend. As you may have seen, we had some events on. I had the pleasure of speaking at two events. That's right. I spoke at the Falun Dafa event with the Chinese community on Saturday, and I'd like to say thank you very much to the Falun Dafa community. They gave me some really lovely gifts. Actually, a book regarding the 20-year persecution of Falun Gong, which of course I'll read. So a big thank you to the Falun Dafa community for having me speak. And also an impromptu speech at a rally for the persecution of Colombian activists right now that's taking place over in Colombia regarding the protests and the police brutality. The protests are in relation to a proposed increase in taxes, amongst other things. So that was unexpected, and we didn't know there was a demonstration put on by the Colombian community, and I was definitely humbled to have the opportunity to speak as that as well. So I had a bit of a multicultural weekend, which I think is pretty good. I think it's important that we're able to unite all the different communities. At the end of the day, we all live here in Australia, and regardless of what community it is that is demonstrating, we're all here and we're all Australian, and ultimately it's our responsibility to unite to do everything we can for this country. Do you think that's fair enough? I think it is. So that was definitely good and a little bit different from the usual types of speeches I make, which was definitely fine by me. Anyways, without further ado, let's get to it, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Let's get to the show. All right, coming up this Saturday, that's right, the Worldwide Rally for Freedom. Now, Monica and I will be speaking in Sydney on Saturday. That's right. So the Worldwide Rally for Freedom is taking place all around Australia, and I'm looking forward to it very much. Now, just so some of you Melburnians know, I never abandoned you. I am not part of the organising committee for these rallies. It was the Sydney crew that invited me to speak, and the Melbourne crew decided they'd prefer to have other speakers, just so you know that I'm not running off or anything like that. And of course, the Melbourne event will be taking place, Worldwide Rally for Freedom, Batman Park on Saturday, 12 p.m. Worldwide Rally for Freedom. And there are, of course, rallies in other cities. Check out the Telegram group Worldwide Rally for Freedom to find out where your local protest is. All right, so that's that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese Communist Party, there's a lot going on. They're never quiet. One thing you can definitely say, you can call them a lot of things, but you can't call them lazy, all right? I will say that 100%. So without further ado, let's smash through the news. There is so much content to get through tonight. So let's just power through, and we'll do a bit of Q&A at the end. Remember on the last episode, if you saw it, we spoke in depth about the emerging relationship between Indonesia and China. And I expressed concerns that this relationship could one day lead to a military alliance between the two nations that could possibly be focused at us here in Australia, specifically in regards to the need that Indonesia and China has, the shared need they have for land and resources, okay? Both being big populations, both wanting more land and needing more resources for their growing economies. We spoke about the Indonesian economy on the last episode, how they've really been able to hit around an average growth rate of 5%, and they're looking to grow their economy more. Now, this was posted after I did the show on the Global Times, the Chinese state-run media. Navies of China and Indonesia held joint maritime exercises in waters of Indonesia's Jakarta on Saturday as part of annually scheduled training plan. All right, so this is happening right in our immediate region. Of course, we know that the Port of Darwin, which is nearby, a strategic location, is leased by a Chinese corporation for 99 years. You can thank Andrew Robb and the FIRB at the time for that, and the Treasurer at the time, who at the time was Scott Morrison, right? Just around the beginning of when he began his tenure as Treasurer. And so now we see joint military cooperation, which I say is concerning, which I say could be a potential indication of a further growing military relationship between Indonesia and China. Now, we here in Australia have done a lot for the Indonesian military. That's right, despite their history of invading other countries and despite their terrible track record of human rights abuses. We in Australia, we give them hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid every year. We send our military personnel to train their military, to train their navy, and now they're teaming up with China. China, which especially over the past 12 months has unleashed the most brazen assault across so many of our industries. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. And it's our politicians that put us in the position of which we now find ourselves, okay? So where we are right now, it may not necessarily be your fault or my fault, although I say we need to claim some responsibility because ultimately we're the ones that kept voting these people in, right? But regardless of all of that, it's our responsibility to make this right, and we have a plan, and we're going to be talking about that plan a lot more. And, you know, we can't go on like this. If we continue to go down this path, then God help us. China is occupying the Indo-Pacific. They're replicating throughout the Pacific Ocean a formation of debt traps which resembles that of a Japanese invasion back in World War II, acquiring critical and strategic infrastructure, and now cozying up to other authoritarian nations right in our immediate geographical region. And I dare say this is going to be a problem that will plague us for a really long time. Okay, what's stopping China and Indonesia from teaming up today and putting boots on the ground here in Australia? What's stopping them? The United States. Okay, so we hope for a strong United States moving forward. Will we see that under Joe Biden? Will we see further bolstering of United States military activity in this particular region, the Indo-Pacific, under Joe Biden? Okay, despite what many people thought, there has been American patrols around the Indo-Pacific asserting American military dominance. Now, I don't necessarily give Joe Biden credit for this. I think he's more of a CEO in a way, and there's people behind the scenes really pulling the strings, especially when it comes to Joe. But I have to say this is very concerning. Who here remembers a few years back when a Chinese naval ship showed up off the coast of Sydney completely unannounced to the public? The politicians knew the ship was coming, but the public didn't. Chinese Navy just showed up armed and said, hey, here we are, just letting you Australians know that we can show up anytime and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, that is a demonstration of capability. That's what it is, ladies and gentlemen. So these naval patrols, it's a demonstration of capability, and essentially it's posturing and sending a message. China is sending a message to the world, but I would say specifically Australia, given this is right in our immediate region, in that we're working with Indonesia, right? We're investing in Indonesia. Indonesia has a military of nearly 400,000 personnel. So Australia, you better do what we say. You better do what we want you to do, because Indonesia's on our side. And tell you what, That's a lot of troops, a lot of army personnel. And in Indonesia, as we said before, with a history of invading other countries, think about East Timor. I dare say this is a problem, and I wish that more people in our parliament were speaking about this problem. Or maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think, no, this isn't a problem. Who cares? It's just a naval patrol. Who cares? No issues there. Is Scott Morrison talking about it? Anyway, put your thoughts in the comments, because it's not all about me. I want to know what you think. But to me, this is very concerning. All right, let's get to more China news, shall we? All right, what do we have here? China faces tougher rules on its European deals spree. The European Union seeks to address concerns that Chinese businesses are competing unfairly around the world. They only figured this out now. I mean, China has only stolen the world's intellectual property for decades on end, mass-producing brands at a fraction of the cost, undermining markets around the world, dumping their products in market, destroying foreign industries and sectors, whilst governments around the world said, hey, this is fine, no problem, as long as we can line our pockets. And we've seen it here in Australia as well, of course, since the implementation of several trade deals, I suppose mostly starting from the Lima Declaration back in the 1970s, the undermining of our industries and the flooding of our markets with cheap products, forcing many Australian businesses into closure. Okay, so now basically Europe is saying that they think it's unfair that China is able to produce products so cheaply. And why can China produce products so cheaply? Well, A, there's no workers' rights in China. B, there's no consideration for human rights in China, and often people don't even get paid for doing their work. Slave labor is a big racket in China. That's right. We look to the region of the far west region of China, East Turkestan, okay, where we see the Muslim minorities routinely abducted and forced into slave labor in factories that then export products out into the Western world. We saw that there was a scandal with the corona face masks being manufactured in these slave labor camps. So unfortunately, many Western countries, for a very long, Western companies, big companies, multinationals, have benefited from this racket for a long time, but it's always at the expense of small to medium-sized businesses and regular workers that have had their jobs and businesses and industries undermined. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the China segment. Anyway, I'm going to read to you here. This is what the EU is doing. The EU unveiled draft rules on Wednesday aimed at cracking down on state-subsidized foreign companies in Europe, a move that could allow regulators to pursue big Chinese companies in much the same way they've targeted US multinationals such as Apple and Amazon. Okay, so what they're talking about here is state-subsidized foreign companies. They're really referring to big companies in China that receive government funding in order to subsidize the cost of their production. And they receive these subsidies as a means of undermining foreign markets in order to drive out foreign competition in foreign markets, so that in the end, China will completely control whichever market it's going after. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It says here, the legislation is the latest sign of Europe's shifting stance towards China, the bloc's biggest trading partner for goods and a crucial market for its exporters. While the new rules don't single out China, analysts said large Chinese companies would be a primary target. Make no mistake about it, this legislation is 100% aimed at China. And what we see is a little bit of a global shift against China. Okay, we've seen the widespread broadcasting of certain crimes and human rights abuses taking place in China, and following on from this widespread knowledge has come sanctioning against China, and now we see the implementation of legislation like this, which is designed to protect local industries. The question we need to be asking ourselves is it too little too late? Okay, so for a very long time now, of course, governments around the world and big corporations have had a field day capitalizing off the 1.5 billion person population in China for slave labor, cheap labor, and a massive export market. Okay, now it goes on to say here, if approved, the EU's 27 governments and the European Parliament, the rules would grant the bloc's muscular antitrust authorities new powers to block foreign companies from making acquisitions in Europe. Okay, we've seen this in Australia now with the Foreign Relations Bill under Scott Morrison. Of course, that was the bill that allowed the Belt and Road Initiative to be torn up. But the question we still have for Scott Morrison is, Why does he consider the Belt and Road Initiative to pose as a security threat or not in our nation's best interest, yet he regards the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership to be in Australia's best interest, which is the biggest multilateral free trade agreement ever signed, with China as the principal trading partner? Okay, this is a question that Scott Morrison has not addressed, and nobody's asked him this question. I mean, I'm asking it on the MCJ report, but we know that the Prime Minister would never watch the MCJ report or even think about a type of question like that was posed to him. So what do you think? Put it in the comments, because all I can do is ask the question and put it out to the universe, and if the answer comes back, that's good. If not, we need to assume that there's other factors at play, all right? It goes on to say here, so the legislations to block corporations from making acquisitions in Europe, and this is really aimed at China. And sorry, I didn't mean to actually go to this page here. I just will, let's see. Sorry, where am I? Receiving public contracts if they deem to have benefit from government subsidies. Okay, so it's saying that essentially if the Chinese government is subsidizing production for certain products from certain businesses in China, that's considered unfair, and they will face stiff fines if they fail to comply with the EU's demands. Okay. All right, so is it too little too late? I don't know. Maybe it is. I mean, China is so entrenched in economies all around the world, and Europe especially. I'm not sure how much of a difference this legislation will make at this stage, but I suppose time will tell. Alrighty, so Taiwan and Japan track warship together in apparent team up at sea. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting story right here. We talk about it on the MCJ report all the time. China invading the sovereign territory of other nations. Of course, we see this time and time again in the South China Sea. China entering the exclusive economic zones of whether it's the Philippines or Vietnam, but we also see China violating the sovereign territories of Taiwan and Japan. Okay, whether it's the Senkaku Islands in Japan or violating the airspace of these particular nations. Now, what this article here is alleging is that there is a new partnership between Taiwan and Japan designed to track Chinese warships. Okay, now this would be pretty interesting for those of you that know a little bit of history from that particular region. Taiwan and Japan have a very bloody military history. That's right, they've been to war together, and it was, of course, during World War II, and lots of lives were lost, and there has, of course, been bad blood over the years. But what it seems here is that these two nations are potentially coming together for the cause of taking on an even greater enemy, which, of course, is the Chinese Communist regime. Okay, now this says apparent, this article here. So this is not proven. It seems to be apparent, okay, just to make that perfectly clear. I'm going to just read to you a little bit here. It says here, a Taiwanese Navy Likong class destroyer can be seen sailing about 6 miles west of the Chinese and Japanese warships. Taipei's Apple Daily described it as the first joint surveillance operation between Taiwan and Japan. Okay, so Taiwanese newspaper actually reporting on it as being a joint operation. But down here it says Taiwan's defense officials, however, did not corroborate the newspaper's view that Taipei and Tokyo had collaborated over the weekend. Okay, Defense Minister Chu said Taiwan dispatches ships and aircraft to monitor any PLA Army assets operating within designated areas. So People's Liberation Army, that's the Chinese military. He said, quote, "It's not about specific cooperation with any country. That's inappropriate to disclose," Chu told reporters. "With regard to national defense, we will monitor whenever required." Okay, so the defense minister here seemingly not wanting to promote to the world Taiwan's strategy for countering China, which makes sense, I suppose. When you're countering the enemy, the last thing you want to do is make your plan and strategy public. So I'll leave it for you to speculate at home. Is Taiwan teaming up with Japan, or is it just a coincidence? All right, on to the New York Post. China's greenhouse gas emissions exceed rest of the developed world. Okay, so this really puts into perspective, right? China's greenhouse gas emissions more than the rest of the developed world. Yet what we see here in Australia is one coal plant being shut down after another. Okay, we're bound to see our electricity prices soar through the roof. It's going to hurt our industry. It's going to hurt our economy. And higher energy prices here in Australia, of course, means at the end of the month, the average Australian family will have less money in their bank account. Okay, now we look at China. China is going full steam ahead with their coal plants. Okay, more emissions than the developed world combined. So why in Australia are we adhering to the Paris Climate Accord and essentially cutting ourselves off at the knees, and by doing so, giving a major competitive and commercial advantage to China? Why are we doing that? Why do we have a death wish in Australia? Okay, I'm just going to read to you here. China's greenhouse gas emissions in 2019 exceeded for the first time those of the US and other developed nations combined, according to a report published Thursday by the Rhodium Group, which is an energy consulting group. Okay, MCJReport.com, go to the homepage, put your email address in, and I'll send this article out to you and you can read through it and you can make up your own mind about what you think this means. Okay, here's an interesting story right here. Honeywell fined millions over exporting sensitive info on F-22 and F-35 jets and more to China. Okay, so this is coming from the United States. Technical drawings alleged to have been exported to China, among other countries, covered components used on various military aircraft and more. I mean, this is really the level that we've sunk to in the West. Personnel from strategic corporations literally exporting sensitive data to China without China even needing to steal that information. I'm going to read to you a little bit from this article right here. Okay. Let's see. So the US government and defense contractor Honeywell have reached a settlement over alleged violations of portions of the Arms Export Control Act and the International Traffic in Arms regulations. The matter at hand had to do with Honeywell's alleged unauthorized export of dozens of technical drawings related to components of various aircraft, missiles, and tanks, including the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the F-22 Raptor Stealth Fighter, and the B-1B bomber, the Tomahawk cruise missile, and the M1A1 Abrams to multiple countries, including China. American officials contend that some of the disclosures harmed national security. Yeah, you think what could possibly go wrong, right? Export the blueprints for these weapons to China, which can be used in the Chinese military. What could possibly go wrong? Something that Honeywell denies. So Honeywell says, no, it's not going to harm national security if we transfer this information into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. That's baloney. It goes on to say, the US State Department announced a deal in which Honeywell agreed to pay $13 million in civil penalties, pretty small price to pay for a corporation like that, among other things. Of that amount, the payment of $5 million was immediately suspended on the condition that the company put it towards remedial compliance measures. Okay, and there's an F-22 Raptor right there, just to give you a bit of a visual. Goes on to say, the settlement demonstrates the department's role in strengthening US industry by protecting US origin defense articles, including technical data from unauthorized exports, according to a press release from the State Department. The settlement also highlights the importance of obtaining appropriate authorization from the department for exporting controlled articles. All right, now, okay, and there's a AB-1B bomber and a Tomahawk cruise missile captured moments before hitting the hulk of a F-4 Phantom. All right, so here's the thing with China. They seem to be able to simply ask for this information, but China has a history of stealing all different types of intellectual property, from shoes to t-shirts to washing machines to F-35 fighter jets. That's right. So China's no stranger to actually illegally acquiring intellectual property in regards to military equipment and so forth. So here's an article here. This is from September 2019 from Business Insider. China steals US designs for new weapons and it's getting away with the greatest intellectual property theft in human history. Okay, so it's kind of interesting to me that in the past China would need to go through the back door. Now seemingly they're able to make connections with Westerners in foreign corporations in order to facilitate deals where they can simply just either buy the intellectual property or obtain it by other means. Okay, so that's pretty concerning to see these types of cozy relationships developing. I would argue that constitutes treason, which should be one of the highest crimes imaginable. Is that fair enough? I'm going to read to you a little bit here from Business Insider. US officials have repeatedly warned about China's increasingly sophisticated military technology and about China's habit of lifting that technology from elsewhere. Okay, we've also suffered cyber attacks from Australia on our government, on our military, and it's also important to point out that a Chinese corporation controls data from our ADF. That's right, the Australian Defence Forces. That's right, controlling data. Defense Secretary Mark Esper at the time recently warned that China was perpetrating the, quote, greatest intellectual property theft in human history, just days after retired Navy admin. Okay, but technological prowess is only one part of military dominance, and there are other areas where China is lacking. Okay, fair enough. All right, so they're no stranger to stealing information. It says here, there's also examples of Chinese military systems looking suspiciously like US systems, the F-22 and the MQ-9 Reaper drone among them, and other alleged attempts to hack into other corporations around the world, such as Swedish telecom provider Ericsson. The list goes on, okay? All right, so clearly China seeks to replace America's role in the world. So why would an American military equipment contractor be collaborating with the Chinese military? Okay, that's a question that you can ponder at home, but I'd say that China has far too much influence in the world. Okay, maybe some of you saw this, the Chinese rocket where debris actually fell from the sky, and debris have been falling from this rocket for a while now, and it's not the first time. Okay, other Chinese rockets have fallen out of the sky before. It's pretty common for these particular rockets made in China that go up, they come down. China says Long March 5B rocket burnt up over Indian Ocean near Maldives. Okay, so the out of control Long March 5B rocket that was launched by China re-entered Earth's atmosphere over the Indian Ocean and burned up, the Chinese Space Engineering Agency has said. And anything that comes from the Chinese government, you really need to take with a grain of salt. You really can't take their word for anything. It says the much covered piece of space junk from the Long March 5B Y2 rocket, which delivered part of China's space station into orbit on April 29th, was expected to come down during the night between Saturday and Sunday. However, the rocket made re-entry at 12:24 Beijing time and fell into the ocean, most of it burnt up on re-entry. All right, so, lucky it didn't hit somebody's house, right, or a school, because you see in the past that nearly happened with other pieces of space junk from Chinese rockets. So here's another example here from earlier this year. Actually, this is the same rocket. Space junk from Chinese rocket breaks up over Queensland, creating a spectacular light show. Okay, so look at the language used by the ABC here. A spectacular light show. It's only a piece of a Chinese rocket that could have severely hurt somebody or damaged somebody or maybe killed somebody. Okay, but instead it's referred to as a spectacular light show. You see the language used by the mainstream media, it's absolutely atrocious. The level of journalism in this country really makes you ask a lot of questions. I'm going to show you the clip here from the Chinese space junk, and this was from Queensland in February.
What was that?
What the heck?
What the hell is it? It's silent though. That's like an asteroid or something. See, it's burning up as it comes in. That's insane. So that's over Maryborough, Queensland. That is insane. Look, it's just disappeared on us behind a cloud. It's still going. Look, it's still going over there. Yeah. That's like a asteroid or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so pretty confusing footage. And of course, there is a contest on for space dominance. We've seen the establishment of Space Force in the United States. China is ramping up their satellites they're sending into space and rockets. And perhaps this will be the new frontier for war and dominance leading into the future. So of course, we see the space junk falling out of the sky there. And I suppose you see it, it's not hard to imagine a scenario where, who knows, maybe at some point missiles will be fired from space into Earth from countries that are at war with each other. What do you think? I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure, but it seems like that is something that is probable given the current climate in relation to space militarization. Anyway, put that in the comments below. All right, so this here was, this is just from May 2020, so this is from a year ago. Chunks of China's powerful rocket fall back to Earth, narrowly missing New York City. Okay, it's pretty convenient. China, of course, at odds with the United States. So China really couldn't choose a better place if they wanted their space junk to fall somewhere than the United States. It says here it's the largest piece of space junk to fall uncontrolled in nearly 30 years. All right, so right near New York City. The Chinese Communist Party probably quite upset it did not hit New York City. All right, moving along here to space.com. This is from 8 months ago. Chinese rocket booster appears to crash near school, during a satellite launch. All right, so there we go. Nearly crashes near a school. What could possibly go wrong? Chinese Long March 4B rocket, as opposed to the 5B rocket that we just covered, successfully launched a new Earth-watching satellite, but the booster's spent first stage narrowly missed a school when it fell back to Earth, witnesses showed. All right. So just China, the Chinese Communist Party, recklessly sending rockets into space. They don't know if they work or not. Just shoot it up into space and hope for the best. Or maybe there's a more sinister approach. Maybe they would like to establish some type of offensive system up in space. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm just asking some questions. Maybe you've got your own thoughts about China and what their ambitions are when it comes to space and outside of Earth's atmosphere. Anyway, if you have some thoughts, put that in the comments below. All right, maybe some of you saw this, a news story here. Well, actually, it's not entirely new. We've known about this for quite a while, but it was broadly publicized actually just recently. And that is that Chinese scientists discussed weaponizing SARS coronaviruses 5 years back. Okay, so this is referring to, of course, SARS-CoV as opposed to SARS-CoV-2, the first widely publicized coronavirus, despite the fact that coronaviruses, just to be perfectly clear, have always been around. And according to WebMD, 1 out of 5 colds are caused by coronaviruses of one variety or another. But nonetheless, I digress. Let's have a look at this story here. Chinese scientists discussed weaponizing SARS coronaviruses 5 years back. A document written by Chinese scientists and health officials in 2015 stated that SARS coronaviruses were a, quote, new era of genetic weapons that could be, quote, artificially manipulated into an emerging human disease virus, then weaponized and unleashed. And that was reported in the Weekend Australian. The paper titled The Unnatural Origin of SARS and New Species of Man-Made Viruses as Genetic Bioweapons suggested that World War III would be fought with biological weapons. Okay? I don't think anyone's really surprised by this at this stage. Is that fair to say? It goes on to say the document that Chinese military scientists were discussing the weaponization of SARS coronaviruses 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's see. It looks like, I'm just going to move this screen a little bit for you, okay, because it looks like the words are getting a little bit chopped off. Okay, that looks just a bit better. Give me 1 second. Now the words will not be chopped off. All right. Peter Jennings, the executive director from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, told news.com.au that the document is as close to a smoking gun as we've got. Okay, we've speculated, of course, in the initial phase when we first heard about this so-called novel coronavirus, we broadly speculated it could have been some type of virus that was leaked from the Wuhan lab. Now, people that made this conclusion or put forward this argument were labeled conspiracy theorists. But now we see these documents regarding China's top officials discussing the weaponization of the original SARS coronavirus. So we really need to be able to open the door in relation to whether or not maybe a coronavirus was being weaponized at the time. Maybe it was accidentally released. Maybe it was meant to be more serious and then we found out it wasn't as serious. But these are all questions that need to be asked. Now, the World Health Organization went into Wuhan a year later to conduct some type of investigation regarding the origins of coronavirus, and they found absolutely nothing, and nobody was surprised by that. China cleaned up the scene as if they were trying to scrub a crime scene before the police got there, and as expected, the World Health Organization came back with nothing. But this is very concerning language used. Okay, so what if China is developing a serious bioweapon that maybe looks like a coronavirus, acts like a coronavirus, but is a lot more serious than a coronavirus? What if China is planning to release something like that into the world? I would say that has to be a possibility, given the proven track record of China's study and development in bioweapons, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. Anyway, I'm going to keep reading the article here. It says, it begins to firm up the possibility that what we have here is the accidental release of a pathogen for military use. That's what Jennings said from ASPI. He also said the document may explain why China has been so reluctant for outside investigations into the origins of COVID-19. What do you guys think about that? Put that in the comments. Do you think that this particular coronavirus was leaked from a Wuhan lab? Do you think it's possible it was intended to be some type of militarized bioweapon? Or do you think it's just simply another coronavirus that exists, that has always existed? What do you think? Put your thoughts in the comments below. All right, I'm going to keep moving forward here. Okay, so this is just to reiterate China's history in bioweapon development. This is from defense1.com. This article is from 2019, Weaponizing Biotech, How China's Military is Preparing for a New Domain of Warfare. Under Beijing's civil military fusion strategy, the PLA, which stands for the People's Liberation Army, and it's always funny when these communist dictator regimes, People's Liberation Army, sounds like a good thing, right? People's liberation. We're here to liberate the people, but actually they're there to enslave the people. And this is reminiscent of the many euphemisms China uses for their various government and military sectors. Anyway, I digress. Is sponsoring research on gene editing, human performance enhancement, and more. All right, so have a look at this. All right. China's national strategy of military-civil fusion has highlighted biology as a priority, and the People's Liberation Army could be at the forefront of expanding and exploiting this knowledge. The PLA's keen interest is reflected in strategic writings and research that argues that advances in biology are contributing to changing the form or character of conflict. For example, in 2010's War for Biological Dominance, Guo G.Y., I don't think I said that right, but anyway, a professor with the 3rd Military Medical University emphasizes the impact of biology on future warfare. Okay, a professor at a military medical university. In 2015, then president of the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, and it's interesting they even have an academy called Military Medical Sciences, argued that biotechnology will become the new, quote, strategic commanding height of national defense, from biomaterials to brain control weapons. I mean, these are the types of weapons they're developing in China. Quote unquote, brain control. Brain control. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, just allow China to develop their biotech ambitions unchecked. Like I'm sure they wouldn't really do anything that bad, right? So we should just get out of their way and not accuse them of misconduct. It says here, biology is among 7 new domains of warfare discussed in a 2017 book by Zhang Shibo, a retired general and former president of the National Defense University, who concludes, quote, modern biotechnology development is gradually showing strong signs characteristic of an offensive capability. Biotech, offensive. Okay, these are 2 words that you really don't want to hear in the same sentence, including the possibility that specific ethnic genetic attacks could be employed. So what that means, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is the development of bioweapons that target certain ethnic genetics only, whilst leaving others alone. So could that mean, for instance, an attack on people who are, I don't know, not Chinese or not something? Put that in the comments. Sounds very concerning. It says here, in the 2017 edition of Science of Military Strategy, a textbook published by the PLA's National Defense University that is considered to be relatively authoritative, debuted a section about biology as a domain of military struggle. Okay? mentioning the potential for new kinds of biological warfare to include specific ethnic genetic attacks. Targeting ethnic groups whilst not targeting other ethnic groups. That's what it sounds like to me. And this is one of the very reasons why we need to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party wherever we can. I mean, this is a regime that the Australian government embedded our economy with and intertwined our culture, essentially, inviting the Confucius Institute in, inviting these actors to spread the style of CCP governance here in Australia. So many of our great Australian markets are completely dependent on the Chinese consumer market. They have so much leverage over us apart from iron ore, which is why we need to use iron ore for everything we can possibly use it for in terms of diplomatic leverage, strategic leverage over the Chinese Communist Party. You see, if you ask me, China is just simply too big. I personally don't believe that any one government should rule over 1.5 billion people. Having such a large consumer market and the brainwashing that is passed down unilaterally from the CCP through the education system creates an environment where the government can make singular decisions that can single-handedly destroy foreign economies or, perhaps wage a major propaganda war against another country, like it happened to us here in Australia, the whole don't go to Australia because Australia is racist, when China wanted to restrict their tourists from visiting us after we called for an inquiry into Corona. There's several different ethnic minorities in China, like the Tibetans, Mongolians, the Uyghurs, etc., and other democratic groups which are underground. 1.5 billion people could easily be broken up into several countries, and there could be some type of maybe like a Chinese union, like the European Union. You understand what I'm saying? And if China was to break down into several countries, sort of like the collapse of the Soviet Union, at least we would rid the world of this entity which has such tremendous power and unilateral command over 1.5 billion people, and the capability to obviously influence and affect or destroy markets around the world. So I see that as really being the only solution to this problem. Maybe you see it differently. If you do, put your thoughts in the comments below. All right, so what is this here? Made in China 2025. A strategic plan by the Chinese government to transform the country into a global high-tech powerhouse across 10 key sectors. The one here, most specifically, that we're looking at is biopharmaceuticals and medical devices. So just reiterating the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions of dominating the global biotech space moving forward. And that includes all types of nefarious activities such as biometric data harvesting and genomic surveillance. All right, moving forward here. So BGI, who here remembers BGI? The world's biggest so-called genetic research organization in the world. BGI is a Chinese corporation that is obviously based in China and has offices and laboratories all around the world. They run China's national gene bank, and several of their subsidiaries have been blacklisted from operating in the United States due to alleged human rights violations, including but not limited to playing a role in biometric data harvesting and suppression of minority groups, most particularly in the region of East Turkestan. Now, it was Greg Hunt and Andrew Forrest that set the framework for the importation of millions of PCR test kits from BGI into Australia, but it also did something a lot more dangerous outside of the simple importation of the test kits. It allowed BGI to establish a further foothold in the Australian market. Now, at the time, BGI already had an office, in Brisbane, but now, thanks to the deal done with Greg Hunt, Andrew Forrest, and BGI, we have several BGI equipped labs all over Australia. I have no idea whether or not these labs are secure. I have no idea whether or not the Chinese Communist Party is able to access data from within these labs, or if there's some type of backdoor access to the reading machinery that's been installed with these labs. Of course, they all got approved and passed through the Therapeutic Goods Administration, but these days everything does, right? The testing equipment, the PCR tests, were approved on the same provisional grounds as were the vaccines, meaning the government said, well, we don't really have time to look at these machines and devices to make sure they're safe. We're just going to roll them out anyway because we need to do something. All right, now we're in a position where we have China's biggest biotech firm that specializes in DNA collection and genomic surveillance here in Australia, with a major foothold in our country. And we know, based on China's open declaration, that China seeks to dominate the world in terms of biotech. All right, so I'm just going to read to you a little bit here. This is BGI that's now here in Australia. That's also part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative we had torn up, and I can't help but thinking that there was possibly some type of connection. Victoria being the only state to sign the Belt and Road Initiative. Greg Hunt, of course, is here in Victoria. He deals with BGI. BGI, a partner of the Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative moving beyond infrastructure-based debt trap diplomacy to, what would you call it, biotech-based debt trap diplomacy, maybe something to that effect. All right, so BGI there. As I mentioned before, the subsidiaries of BGI have been seriously investigated by the United States. We have here Chinese coronavirus test maker agreed to build a Xinjiang gene bank. Okay, so the Muslims in China, where they're persecuted in the region of East Turkestan, you got BGI that put a proposal in to build a gene bank for, what could it be for, right? Well, we think about human organ harvesting in China, and what is required for human organ harvesting is a big pool of the biometric data of citizens in order to match potential organ harvesting victims with illegal organ buyers. Okay, struggling to get this out right. So, an international traveler comes to China, wants an organ transplant. The Chinese authorities, or whoever's running the organ harvesting operation, needs to have quick access in order to match the buyer with a forced donor, in which case they need to have a very organized gene data bank. BGI specialty. USA blacklist Chinese companies tied to Xinjiang Gene Bank project. Yep, we mentioned that before, so that was coming from the United States Department of Commerce. It's been widely reported now. Here you go in the Epoch Times. CCP collects Americans' DNA. The Chinese Communist Party has made collecting healthcare data, including genetic information, a national priority. That's right. China seeks to capture the genetic information on all their citizens, and they'd like to export that model to the world. They'd like to become the best at genomic surveillance and sell it to the rest of the world, and probably they'd like to have access to all genomic data captured from around the world. And many concerns have been raised. California actually decided to ditch using BGI out of concerns for the safety and protection of their citizens' genetic information. Concerns have also been raised by our very own experts at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute regarding genomic surveillance and the role the Chinese Communist Party and companies like BGI are playing in the acquisition of private citizens' DNA. Okay, a great report here. Again, MCJReport.com. I'll send it out to you. Very, very detailed. I don't think Greg Hunt actually cared to review this information, though. He doesn't need to, because he knows best, right? Greg Hunt knows everything. He's the health minister who doesn't actually have a background in health. But you have to listen to him, because Greg Hunt's smart, and he's smarter than all of us, and he knows what he's talking about. And the people here from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute that have dedicated their lives to foreign policy and China relations and national security, they don't know anything. Greg Hunt knows it all. All right, so just remember that, and we'll be fine. All right, anyway, moving on to some new information, some more boasting by China here. Up to 100 times faster than 5G, China claims the early lead in 6G. So you really can't believe much that comes out of China. This could just be posing and posturing, trying to show off to the world, a propaganda campaign trying to legitimize the CCP in the eyes of the global community, whilst they simultaneously undermine markets around the world, commit human rights abuses, and steal our intellectual property. But they want us to say, well, China, job well done, you're building the 6G. You're building 6G, so good for you. Says that it has the early lead in intellectual property. You know, it's pretty interesting to see China talking about intellectual property, considering the entire Chinese market is essentially built on stolen intellectual property. It says here, the China National Intellectual Property Administration went through Chinese state-run media last week to announce that the country has a lead in 6G-related intellectual property. So I sort of interpret this as boasting and posturing without any real context, more propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party. And I say the sooner that we move away from this regime that has committed these most unspeakable crimes and has attacked our industries and undermined our culture in our country, the better off all Australians will be. That's my firm belief. And if I was to ever work within the walls of Parliament, believe me, this would be on the agenda all the time for me. Yeah, and there's Greg Hunt there when he did that sleazy deal with Andrew Forrest. Who's calling his shots? Was it Greg Hunt or was it Andrew Forrest? Or was it the consul from the Victorian Tasmanian Consul General Long Zhu? Was it BGI? I don't know, but I can tell you who was not calling the shots, and that was the Australian people. We didn't vote for our officials to get into office and to spend our money on these items from the biggest biotech genetic research company in the world, BGI, that's alleged to be involved in these human rights abuses. We didn't ask for that. But Greg Hunt said it's a good idea, so therefore we should just accept it. All right, what do we have here? Okay, moving on to Italy now. Now, this is a pretty big China segment. I actually didn't think it was going to go this long, but it just goes to show there's no shortage of news when it comes to the ways of the CCP and how their actions affect us in Australia and people all around the world. Who here knows about this? The Chinese workers who assemble designer bags in Tuscany. Many companies are using inexpensive immigrant labor to manufacture handbags that bear Made in Italy label. So this is actually a big issue in Italy. Who here knows about this? So northern Italy, right, basically converted into a big Chinese industrial zone. Since the 90s, they have had an influx of Chinese migrants that have essentially established their own factories. But in doing so, the Italian luxury market has been undermined. So instead of using locally produced fabrics, these companies would import large amounts of cheaper fabrics from Italy, of course, undercutting local suppliers. Okay, similar to what happens in Australia across so many sectors. And what we've seen over Italy is that even some of the better known brands have started using these factories to assemble and manufacture their goods. Okay, so technically made in Italy, so these brands are able to ride off the glamorous Made in Italy logo, but really made in an offshore Chinese factory, so a Chinese factory that just simply happens to be based in Italy. There's been quite a lot of conflicts actually over the years between the citizens in Prato, that's the city where most of these factories are, and a lot of the Chinese companies that have set up shop there. Both have their own arguments. The locals have been complaining about, of course, the cheap imported fabric that have put many Italian producers out of business. The cheap labour, so workers being paid not on the books. Now we have that here in Melbourne as well with many Chinese businesses. An example I can think of off the top of my head, the bubble tea places. The bubble tea places that tend to hire a lot of staff, and we took a look into them a couple of years back, and what we found out is that they were contract workers and were not receiving a minimum wage. And we could investigate so many businesses like that here in Australia, where businesses are established, say Chinese businesses that have several workers, and they live in small sort of confined areas and are underpaid well below minimum wages in Australia, therefore undermining other businesses who are doing the right thing that are paying minimum wage. Anyway, I digress. Going back to Italy. So what they've also experienced there in Italy, of course, is stolen intellectual property, knockoffs. So, just straight out copying other brands and shipping it out of Italy as disguised as a genuine made in Italy product. Of course, Italian businesses, big businesses, have capitalized on the cheap labor, which has created job shortages for the locals there. And many businesses have been, forced to shut down. And many unsuspecting buyers from around the world who believed that they were purchasing a genuine made in Italy product, of course, have not been. Which all goes to show that you shouldn't get too caught up with a tag on made in Italy. It's really no reason to get excited anymore, because for all you know, it may as well be made in China. All right, so that's the situation in Italy in regards to what has transpired over the years. And what we know for sure is that China is notorious for corruption, and there's also been documented cases of government officials being paid off and so forth. And it's interesting when we think back to the inception of the corona situation. Italy was actually the first country to really welcome people into China, and it was very bizarre what happened at the time, if you can think back to that stage. Now, yeah, as I just said, tensions between Italians and Chinese migrants existed long before coronavirus, and it was in relation to what we just mentioned with the luxury goods trade, more specifically, the undermining of the trade. Smuggling cheaper substandard fabrics from China into Italy, stitching them together in Italy and passing them off as genuine made in Italy products. Just one of the many tricks in a big deep bag of CCP tricks. All right, so here's some footage here. This is actually from 10 years ago. This is one of the factories in Italy run by a Chinese company. And this is from the German state broadcaster, DW, which is actually pretty good. I actually don't mind the German state broadcaster. I find they produce interesting content. I'm going to play this for you right now so you can have a bit of a look at what these factories look like. And believe me, we have factories that look just the same here in Melbourne and all over Australia.
This is one of several thousand factory buildings in Prato. But the Prato police chief has placed some restrictions on which I can film. I'm not permitted to show the faces of the police officers, nor of the Chinese workers. Made in Italy is on the labels of the clothes made here. Of course, that's true, but they're made under very un-Italian conditions. At sewing machines like these, Chinese immigrants work for up to 16 hours a day. Most of them are completely dependent on the factory owners. Many are here illegally and, if caught, face deportation. They sleep in a boarded-off corner of the factory floor. I'm shocked by what I see. What's happening here looks like sheer exploitation to me. And there doesn't seem to be any hope of improvement on the horizon. I'm told there are simply too many clothing factories like these. Inspecting all of them just once would take the authorities here around 10 years. At the end of my stay in Prato, I returned to Chinatown.
Yeah, so as you can see, a pretty dire situation. It's also important to note out that a lot of the workers that are working in these Chinese factories in Italy, it's not their fault. A lot of them become beholden to predatory business owners that exploit them for cheap labor. Some of them could have a visa expired and essentially be beholden to somebody ruling over them, forcing them to work huge amounts of hours, stuck in a foreign country, forced with no other option but to work. So I just wanted to point that out as well. I'm not trying to make out that all of the people operating these factories are doing so in a sinister way. Some people are sort of trapped and get sucked into it, but of course it's a pretty typical model that is designed to engulf and swallow up and destroy the market that was in place before those factories were established. Does that make sense? Anyway, moving forward. Okay, so moving forward to the Philippines here, President Duterte threatens to stake a claim over South China Sea energy resources using military ships. Okay, so we see some pretty big words, some tough talk coming from the president of Philippines, essentially threatening China should China engage in oil drilling in the contested regions of the South China Sea. Have a look at this. The president said he's not so much interested in fishing and the disputed waterways marine resources. Okay, he kind of said, look, there's not much fish there anyway, so China can have the fish. It's the oil that he's interested in. But he warned in a late-night televised address that he would send naval ships to the contested waters if China begins to drill for oil. Really? Do you think he really will? Or do you think it's an empty threat? It says here, President Duterte said he prepared to send military ships to stake a claim over oil and mineral resources in the South China Sea, while noting that challenging Beijing in the disputed waters will only lead to violence. He said, it will be bloody, Philippines Duterte threatens. It will be bloody. That's the threat he's putting out there to China. But the question is it a real threat, or has Duterte lost the plot? Remember what he said about the people who were supposedly violating the lockdown restrictions? His words were, shoot them dead. We've seen this guy fly off the handle a few times, and I think these are words, and I question the mental stability of the president of Duterte, and I mean that in no way disrespectful to the Filipino people, but I'll put into context why I'm saying this. Okay, so it will be bloody, right, on one hand. Now, he claims that should China start drilling oil in the South China Sea, they're going to send their naval ships and they're going to engage in combat, right? Blood, combat, kind of goes hand in hand. But here's the thing, China's already drilling deep in the South China Sea. This is from just this is just from April. China has drilled deep in the South China Sea to retrieve sediment core from the seabed. Okay, so they say that they're retrieving sediment core for investigations and to conduct research studies on the floor of the South China Sea. But really, we know that the South China Sea is rich in oil, and China very much wants that oil and wants to control one of the busiest commercial trading areas on the face of the earth. The South China Sea, remember, home to 1/3 of global trade, so a very strategic location for China. It says Chinese scientists on a marine research vessel. So a marine research vessel, but really you have to figure that ultimately what they want is the oil. So these types of practices taking place already. So will the Filipino President Duterte send his naval ships since these types of drilling activities are already taking place? Or does he really need to wait to see a smoking gun and to see the barrels of oil before he does anything? Well, one can argue he probably won't do anything. He admitted in the past that there's really nothing that the Philippines can do about China, sadly. Said here, quote, China has the arms, we do not have it. And he said that regarding the Philippine Sea. Okay, he said that in relation to China's illegal occupation of the South China Sea and the Filipino exclusive economic zone. Duterte essentially expressed that although he disagrees with what China is doing, although he believes in the territorial rights of the Philippines exclusive economic zone, he also was forced to accept that the Philippines simply doesn't have the military capability to do anything about China's activity. Okay, so I see these words saying it will be bloody. I think to myself, really is, I don't know what's going on with this guy. I don't know if he's a drinker, whether he's awake and he's drinking whiskey and he says these damn CCP people, this is it, the gloves are off sort of thing. Anyway, it says here, while Manila has legal entitlements over the West Philippine Sea as ruled upon in a tribunal, so in the international law courts, President Duterte said he cannot do anything on the maritime dispute with China, and that's because China has the military and the Philippines does not. Now, here's another thing to take into consideration why probably the Philippines can't do anything about China. Just like in Australia, the Filipino economy is deeply embedded with China. We see China making up over 25% of exports from the Philippines. Okay, now here in the Observatory for Economic Complexity, they've actually separated Hong Kong and China, which, you know, I wish that Hong Kong was its own country, but unfortunately Hong Kong is completely ruled by China with an iron fist, so we do need to combine the two together. No disrespect to my Hong Kong friends, but that's just the reality of the situation. So we see the Filipino markets here, integrated circuits, office machine parts. Many of these markets here deeply dependent on the Chinese consumer market. So the president of Philippines can kick and scream all he wants, but ultimately at the end of the day, China has the capability to shut down the lights of every home in the Philippines unless the USA really got involved. Will they get involved? I don't know. That's a question that I don't have the answer to. And when we compare the military side by side, China and the Philippines, there's really no contest. This is from globalfirepower.com. I really like this website. It analyzes the different metrics from different military forces around the world. China ranked 3 out of 140, Philippines ranked 48. Factors taken into consideration include personnel, military-age males, weapons, machinery, tanks, aircraft, etc., naval, air force. So a really good website, globalfirepower.com. You can put in any two countries in the world and compare their military metrics side by side. Very, very useful. I recommend it. All right. So that is the end of the China segment of the show, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we've ever done a China segment so long. I didn't expect it to be this long, actually. And we haven't even gotten to Corona. So you know what? We're going to keep this rolling. You're all doing a great job. And I can see that you are hanging in there with me. I see Michelle Ash, Kiros, Kathy, Ching, how are you, my friend? Terry, it's great to see each and every one of you there. And it's a pretty big show. Okay, so I can see that you're all active and you're doing a great thing being involved in there. And I'm going to keep this moving and I'm going to keep this rolling. So on to the You Can Say No section of the show, which entails Corona updates. Okay, so a smaller section today because today we had a lot to cover on the CCP. But let's get to some Corona information, shall we? All right, Scott Morrison says Australia will remain shut off to the world indefinitely, but denies saying elimination is the goal. All right, so really just some more semantics here by Scott Morrison, putting words in our mouth. Have a look at this. Scott Morrison said he, quote, doesn't see an appetite for Australia opening to the world at the moment, adding that he intends to be cautious while rolling out. Well, I think that many Australians have an appetite to travel and an appetite to be open to the world. Scott Morrison, I say, is out of touch and speaks on behalf of very few people. Okay. He also said that it's unclear how effective coronavirus vaccines were in preventing transmission. So Scott Morrison says it's unclear how effective they are, yet Greg Hunt says they are effective. I'm going to remind you about what Greg Hunt said because it's important that time and time again we point out the contradictions that we see within our own government, within the same party.
The world is engaged in the largest clinical trial, the largest global vaccination trial ever, and we will have enormous amounts of data. But what's the message for the public? It's safe, it's effective, it will help protect you, but it will also help protect your mum and dad, your grandparents, your nonna, all of Australia.
A couple of
Rightio. So on one hand, the Prime Minister says that it's, quote, unclear how effective coronavirus vaccines are. And on the other hand, you've got the Health Minister saying they're safe, they're effective, they'll protect your parents, your grandparents, all Australians. How can we have this type of disparity in messaging? And why is the Therapeutic Goods Administration not giving Greg Hunt a call and telling him, hey, you can't say that, it's only a provisional approval? How come no one's pulling Greg Hunt up on this? Why is Greg Hunt able to make these unfounded claims without any repercussions for anything? What if Greg Hunt was to cause a tremendous amount of public damage and put the general public at risk due to his advice? Will Greg Hunt be held liable or will he not? Well, unfortunately, I think we all know what the answer is, and that is that unfortunately a lot of these particular characters are part of a protected class whereby the rules that apply to us do not apply to them. Anyway, so we have here more statements from Greg Hunt. Unless Australia cuts itself off completely from the rest of the world, there's no guarantee there'll never be another COVID-19 case. Now, is it COVID-19, Greg Hunt, or is it SARS-CoV-2, or is it a coronavirus? Why is Greg Hunt using terminology that is inherently different? Why is he using the term COVID-19 in a seemingly interchangeable manner with SARS-CoV-2, right? COVID-19 being the disease, SARS-CoV-2 being the virus that causes the disease. Does Greg Hunt even understand what he's saying? Or is he nothing more than a puppet that is reading off a script and is doing whatever the boss tells him to do? Okay. Now, as we know, coronaviruses have been around since the beginning of time, right? Pretty much for as far back as we know. And to make the case for never having another coronavirus infection anywhere is just ridiculous. So Greg Hunt's narrative is his own. It is not the view of Australian people. Viruses have always been around. So, this is just the government trying to put words into our mouths in replacement for us thinking for ourselves. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got our own brains. We can think for ourselves. We don't need the government to think for us, nor should we ever allow them to. I'd say that's very dangerous. More information here. Decreased influenza activity during COVID-19 pandemic, United States, Australia, Chile, South Africa. All around the world, the flu, influenza just disappeared, right? And it's just a coincidence. COVID-19 hits, no more flu. Many health departments around the world just stopped reporting on the flu while the flu went, and now we've got corona, all right? So one problem replaced with another, and the authorities want you to believe that the flu disappeared due to measures such as face masks, social distancing, lockdowns, and isolation. Whereas we, the people, are saying that maybe, just maybe, there's a different reason why the flu disappeared. Maybe there's a different reason. What do you think that reason is? Put that in the comments. All right, check this out. Melinda Gates had been seeking a divorce from Bill since 2019 after his meetings with Jeffrey Epstein became public, the Wall Street Journal reports. All right, I just threw this in with the corona news because you think about corona, Bill Gates is pretty much the same thing. So look at this. Melinda Gates reportedly considered a divorce 2 years ago before officially filing for one. She met with several lawyers, the Wall Street Journal reported. So Melinda Gates, not comfortable with Bill Gates' relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I wonder why that was. Now, Bill Gates, of course, denied any knowledge of the activities of Jeffrey Epstein, who is, of course, the disgraced pedophile and child trafficker that allegedly killed himself, right? Allegedly. I'll say allegedly. And Bill Gates said he didn't know anything about it, didn't know anything that was going on with Jeffrey Epstein. Yet we see reported here that his wife felt so uncomfortable by their relationship that she wanted a divorce. Is it that she was she better able to judge Epstein's character than was Gates? Or is there something else that is not being made, we're not being made aware of? Does Melinda Gates know something about Bill Gates' involvement with Jeffrey Epstein that we, the people, are not privy to? That is the question. Will she release this information to the public? She may be the only person who truly knows. Okay? So we see here that they met Bill Gates, Bill Gates and his wife met Jeffrey Epstein in 2013, and it reportedly left Melinda Gates upset. I wonder what exactly it was that upset her. What exactly was it, hey? It says here the ended uncomfortably close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. All right, so it's important to point out here that at the time when Bill Gates met Jeffrey Epstein, it was actually 3 years after a conviction. Okay, so it was 3 years after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted. See here, he pleaded guilty to soliciting an underage girl. So Gates knew about his history in pedophilia and decided to meet him anyway. If you look at the timeline, in 2013, he flew on Epstein's private plane, dubbed the Lolita Express. It was allegedly an aircraft used to traffic underage girls, but his spokesman, as in Gates's spokesman, claimed he was not aware that the plane belonged to the banker. Right. Had no idea, right? Just no idea. I mean, the guy admitted to sexual crimes against children. He admitted to it, and then 3 years later, Bill Gates is hanging out with him. So, and yet he had no idea about any of the activities of Jeffrey Epstein. Yet Melinda Gates was so disturbed that she claimed that's what led to the divorce. I mean, come on, guys. Just put the dots together. It's not rocket science. There they are. Epstein and Bill Gates, side by side, with a big, sleazy smile on their faces. More corona news, more vaccine passports being rolled out, this time in Cyprus. Americans on the street hesitating to take their face masks off, just feeling like, no, I have to wear my face mask. This is part of me now. The conditioning has really been very effective. Alrighty. So, I'm just going to cover one international story before we wrap it up, and that is what's going on in Colombia. That's right. So 26 people dead in the protests that are taking place over in Colombia. I stumbled across a Colombian protest actually on the weekend here in Melbourne, and I said a few words to the crowd, which was definitely nice to address the Colombian community. We wish them all the best, and of course we respect their right to express their views, which is something that we seek to protect in Australia for all people. So there's protests going on in Colombia right now. Reported here, ABC News from the United States, 26 dead and more than 900 reported injured. And the demonstrations are in relation to proposed tax increases, and the protesters are concerned that these increases could send people into poverty. Now, the president actually cancelled the proposal and the finance minister resigned. So the protesters were successful, but now the protests have evolved into other areas. Now, it's important to point out that in South America, corruption reigns king over these countries. Corruption is so deeply embedded in the political environments of all of these countries. So whatever small victory the protesters were able to achieve, they still have a mountain of other issues that desperately need tackling. Now, the Colombian government argued that the increase in these taxes was in relation to repairing the economy due to Corona. But actually, the people of Colombia and other South American countries have been stiffed by the governments for decades on end, fleeced dry, overtaxed, underpaid. It's pushed to the side. You know, we don't want to see that type of thing happen here in Australia or anywhere. So using Corona as an excuse to increase tax on the people who've already suffered is just utterly disgusting. So I do most definitely support the protesters over there in their fight for fairness. And I'll just play a little bit of footage for you right here. It goes for 1 minute. At least 26 people are dead and over 900 injured in the protests. There you go, water cannons. Demonstrations erupted on April 28th, decrying President Duquesne's proposed tax hike. They protest well. The plan was meant to unburden the government from the pandemic's financial strain. Right? That's just an excuse, really, I'd say. The bid sparked unrest from the country's working class, and the president cancelled the proposal. There's the riot police. They look like the Victoria police officers from last year. Protesters are now demanding social reforms and denouncing police violence as Colombian police. I missed that. So there's 22 reports of deaths in the protest since the start of the uprising. Yeah.
Our efforts are starting to work.
And we don't want to hear from Joe Biden. All right. Anyway, that just about wraps up the show. So a bit of a long one tonight. If you'd like to support the show, this is only made possible with your support. mcjreport.com/support. So I'm proud to be supported by you. And MCJ Report, we don't receive any corporate sponsorships, any corporate money, anything like that. My sole responsibility is to you, the people that fund this operation, that make it possible. So, yeah, in order for me to continue this work, I do rely on this particular avenue of funding, which is mcjreport.com/support. If you do support the show, I will add you to a private MCJ supporters members Telegram group, where I'm active and we share ideas back and forth, and we even have some special events, and you may be made privy to some announcements ahead of time and things like that. So again, if you'd like to support, you can do so from as little as $5. Every bit helps. mcjreport.com/support. All right. Now that's just about it. We'll do a bit of Q&A. I can see some of you still there in the chat. There's Christina, Anna. Thank you so much. Grant. Joyce. Oh, you didn't see the video? Oh, okay. Do you want me, I think I didn't put the screen on. Jeez. I'll show you the video. My apologies. Where are we? All right. We don't, not this guy. All right. This is it. Try again. So that's the video. Yeah, I think I just didn't click the right button there. So anyway, that's about it for the show today, guys. Now we can do a bit of Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me anything you want. I can see a lot of you are hanging in there now. Daniel says, do I speak Spanish? Well, I do. Yeah, not the best, but I would say conversational, just conversational. Teresa says, bless Colombia. Yeah, absolutely. We the people have to take back our countries. I agree 100%. Helen says, do the clear phones block the QR codes from stealing your data? I don't know. I don't know the details on the clear phones. I won't be selling them. I don't know. I don't know if they do the job or not. So I really can't comment. We have to take our countries back. That's right. Am I speaking at Sydney? That's right. I'm speaking at Sydney on Saturday, the 15th. Monica's speaking as well. And of course, there's going to be the Melbourne event as well. Kathy says, will I ever run for our Prime Minister? I'll never say never. Never say never. I love our country very much. I'm really proud to be Australian. I believe in the Australian fighting spirit. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I want to do what I can. I really want to do what I can. So Paul says, are the jabs mandatory? For certain industries they are, but what we're yet to truly understand is to what degree private citizens will be punished should they not take the vaccine. What private and public services will people be restricted from, and how is that going to look? Beryl says, how brave are the protesters? They are brave, absolutely. They're great people, and I was really happy to speak in front of a great Colombian crowd on Saturday, and I think it's really important that we unite and all people here come together for Australia. And obviously we respect their right to demonstrate, to advocate for the concerns they have for their fellow country people. That's part of Australia, right? You're free to express yourself however you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and ask for me. Or ask me. Can't wait until we fly again. Yeah, I'd like to fly. I like planes. Oh, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, Teresa says I spoke great Spanish. It's pretty nerve-wracking to say something in a language you're not confident in front of a crowd. But they're very accepting people, and I think generally the crowd appreciated that I at least made an effort. So it was good. It was good. Just checking, how do we stop China accessing our iron ore? True, Aaron, this is what we've been saying, right? This is what we've been saying. The government doesn't want to address it, so we're going to have to vote new people in that will address it, if you catch my drift. That's true, Kathy. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Okay, so there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy in the air. Andrea says, is the Lima Declaration still current? Well, it was the Lima Declaration that led on to many other trade policies that have essentially resulted in the deindustrialization of our country. It's been changed since then, but the concept is really much the same. Hey, there's Norbert there. Thank you very much, my friend. Julie says, can we sell our iron ore to somewhere else? Well, part of the problem is that China produces roughly 50% of the world's steel. Okay, so China has an almost monopoly on steel production. They buy our iron ore, they convert it into steel, and they ship it all around the world. Now, the question we need to be asking ourselves is what measures do we in Australia need to take so that we can become the world's biggest exporter of steel? Why should we send our iron ore to China so they can water it down, turn it into steel, make trillions of dollars, billions of dollars, sending it all over to the world? We need to ramp up steel production here in Australia. And of course the objections will be, well, it's not viable, it's not affordable. But with advanced manufacturing and robotics and innovation, I would have to think that this is seriously an area that we need to look into. Just imagine we actually produced enough steel to become a major steel exporter in the world. cut off the iron ore to China. I mean, I'm speaking a little bit theoretically right now, but it's absolutely pathetic. We dig holes in the ground. We don't refine our own resources. We send it to China. A lot of the time, China processes it, degrades it, sends it back to us, ships it all over the world, makes an absolute ton of money, builds their militarized islands in the South China Sea, builds their navy, their military, and we're sitting here whilst China's conducting military joint patrols with Indonesia. Just hey, we're just sitting here like we'll just wait for you to invade before we think about what to do. True, Julie. Yeah. So I don't have the exact answer. How would we be able to ramp up steel production in Australia? But it's something that I think needs to be explored and spoken about. Is that fair enough? Yeah. Someone asked in relation to the QR code. Well, I've heard some loose legal arguments in relation to the Privacy Act. In relation to whether or not a business can require you to hand over your personal information. Okay, now the government wants everyone to use the government application. At Crown Casino, they want you to download some government app. Now, there's ways around it. That's right. Fortescue, Rio Tinto, they're a couple of the big players. Ching says, unless Australia is taking place of China over supplying steel to German industries, I see no possibility stopping China exporting steel. Well, in order for China to export steel in the quantity of which it does, you have to think that China would not be able to do that without Australian iron ore. Okay, so you cut the iron ore, China must cut its steel exports, which would hurt its economy a lot. Now, of course, it will leave a void in the Australian economy, which will require some very strategic planning, industry diversification. Here in Australia, we used to have a good, complex economy where we manufactured a lot of different things. Now, the complexity of our economy resembles that of a third world nation. It's an absolute embarrassment. That's true. Julie says, is shedding real? I don't have the answer to that question, but I have seen many, many complaints emerging online of people experiencing side effects, citing that particular concern. But in relation to rock solid substantial evidence, I don't know. There was a document released by Pfizer, which I have a copy of, detailing one of their clinical trials, which seemed to imply that having contact with somebody who was involved in the clinical trial could result in a potential transmission. Okay? Is that shedding? Is it not? Is that shedding that Pfizer was referencing? Who here knows the document? I've got a copy of it. Sign up on my Telegram, Morgan C. Jonas, and I'll post it on there. So, could be. Could be. So Julian says, what was the big announcement over the weekend? Okay, so yeah, people know by now. We're starting a political party, and you're going to hear a lot more about it really, really soon, from tomorrow. You denied entry. That's terrible because you wouldn't download the government app. It's bad. It's discrimination. It really is discrimination. That's right, Beryl, we did. That's true, Ash. You know, whenever the government tries to increase their stranglehold on our privacy, you have people on the opposite side in the technology space looking to counter those advances. We see that a lot with blockchain and cryptocurrency. Good on you, Teresa. Good on you. Yeah, we're here for you. All right, cool. So that's probably going to wrap it up. I'll be back live on Wednesday. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Mark Hobart, a great doctor, a doctor for truth, who recently appealed to Brett Sutton and has yet to receive a reply. I like Mark a lot. He's a great guy, and he's going to actually come on the MCJ Report. All right, anyway, I'm going to log off now, guys. It's been a great evening. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. You could have been doing anything, but you've chose to be here, and I'll speak to you really soon. Good night.